Hold on a second here. Got you guys. Give me just seconds. Well, give me just a second. Fix my camera. Occasionally, that's why we start just a hair earlier. We get technical difficulties. So, tonight, guys, you got me like this a little bit. Hope you guys can bear with me. It looks like an Instagram live shot right now. Let me see here. Give me just a second. Okay, everything kind of half set up. At least I got audio. That's always a good thing. And at least it's clear. All right, guys, we'll go like this tonight. As you probably can see, it's like, oh man, this messed up. Gotta upgrade my phone. Is about time, about 3 generations back. Upgrade it, so I got another phone. Apparently, it switched up one of my settings, but I don't. I know what to do, but I'd have to disconnect the live, reconnect, do all that, and I don't want to do that. You guys can see me this way. This will work for its purpose tonight, and you can see me clearly and hear the audio. It's all good. So that part is good. Welcome to having a new phone. I wasn't even sure if the audio was going to work correctly with some of my connections, but I'm glad you guys can hear me. You guys can definitely see me clearly, so that's okay. We will work it all out, and I'll get this hooked up next week a little different, where we have the camera angle a little bit. But the cool thing is that this feature, I can see the chat a lot easier with you guys popping up at the same time. So I do like that feature. But as you can probably see, new iPhone. Hopefully you can project a little clear. You probably can see I'm a little bit tighter tonight. Nicole and I just got back this midday. We flew in from the Ministers and Leaders Conference in College Park. It was great seeing everybody. It was great seeing Dr. Dollar, Pastor Safi, our founding pastors, my spiritual parents, and they, of course, as always, send their love and blessings. So it was good to connect with them, get fed, get spiritually recharged, and really just, I was super excited, just to really pick up on where we're all going, just as a body of Christ when we talk about that. And it was a lot of good things. But anyways, Thursday night, you came here to get fed with the Word of God. And that's what it's all about. Doesn't matter tired, doesn't matter a little camera issue or any of those things. It is about getting this Word. It is about getting something that will change your life, to empower your day, and just make things better. And that's what we're going to do tonight. You know how it is. Like it, share it, subscribe. Let people know we are here on Thursday nights. Is what we're here 7 p.m. every Thursday. Most of the time I'm going to do even more of the lives like this is my goal, especially since we've gone to every Sunday morning, guys, 10:30 a.m. to All Harbor Ballroom. If you're not there, dude, come on out. There's an opportunity to connect with community. It's like, man, I don't feel like I'm connected to the church. You got to get connected with people at the same time. Is going to play a factor in that, but I hope to see you there, because it really is going to bless your life. I don't just say that loosely or just because it makes it feel good when the room's full. It really is about connecting with community, with people, and you kind of it's all, it's a little different, it's a little new, but man, it's been so good on Sunday mornings being able to connect with you guys. So as you know, though, give you a few quick updates there. We're done with that part. Go about 35 minutes into the Word. Jam is full, and then we'll come back Saturday night virtually at 6 p.m. And then, of course, 10:30 a.m. we got church. So, man, you get the Word now 3 times a week with different messages, something coming at you all the time. So, good to see everybody. We got LA in the house, California in the house. We got Shonda, good to see you. Eloise, good to see you. And we got a few other I see on here too. So, man, good to see you guys. So let's get right back into where I kind of left you guys off from, where I was talking about last time I was live with you Thursday. And it was a really fresh message. As I say, I appreciate you guys letting me come on Thursday and just really introduce new revelations, fresh revelations God has imparted in my heart, because it allows me to bring them even stronger next time we come back around and sharpen them up. And that is the very thing that has happened with this message right here. So the title of my message is The Balance. And why do you bring up the balance? Well, Thursday night is always about, you see the title really is, it isn't the message title. Thursday night is always about what the church could be. I say could be, because I still believe in church. I believe in the power of church. I believe in an institution of church. I'm a senior pastor of an institution. But I also believe that the church has got to change. And the church is not where it needs to be. And the church has got to make some drastic adjustments and progress forward in some things and let go of some old things. And it really is about challenging us. Because when I say what the church could be, well, yeah, I'm talking about the church as a whole, but what I'm challenging is us right here. Those who come in on Thursday night, because I want us to be the catalyst to that point for our area, what we can control. And it really starts with us. Am I changing? If I want to see the church be better, if I want to see the church be different, am I going to be different? And that's why I'm challenging myself. I'm challenging us. So I'm always challenging old ideas so we can progress into new ideas and new light and new understanding of God. And that's what this is all about. So I'm talking about the balance. One thing I've realized from my own Christian walk, people are like, man, what's the balance really? Where do you get all this from? I get it from literally about 14 years to 15 years of just struggle in my own Christian walk. Probably from about the time I was 16 till my late 20s. This was an area that I just really did not understand. It caused me to struggle in my faith a lot, struggle in my relationship with God, struggle with church and everything in my life because I didn't know how to balance things in my life. I would normally go one extreme or the other. I'll give the analogy, it's like a young driver. I give this analogy, I'm teaching my son Jeremiah how to drive. And back when I was a young driver, my parents would, in my high schools and things like that, we'd have friends and stuff or know people in our community and stuff that unfortunately they were learning how to drive. And now you're going down the road, and if you get off too far on one side of the lane, particularly the right-hand lane, they got those little ribs in the road a lot of times, and the tire hits it, starts going like that. That's to let you know, hey, you're going off the edge of the road. And a lot of times it would freak people out, and they'd overcorrect. When they overcorrect, tragically, you could sometimes end up oncoming traffic. You hit the other side of the ditch. It's a lot of stuff, and it's freaking out. The reason I give that analogy, because that's what it feels like a lot of times in church world. We're just overcorrecting one ditch to another. It's easy to hear a preacher give a message and be like, yeah, I'm excited about that. I want to do that. And there's nothing wrong with that. I hope you are excited, ready to do that. But realize they're giving a piece. I try to tell people, I'm giving you a piece of who God is. I have to kind of break down piece by piece is what we're doing. But if we get overemphasized on something, I remember my early years, I didn't know how to balance prosperity. I thought, oh, well, I finally got this revelation. It was, man, God will bless me. God will financially take care of me. Oh, that's amazing. Maybe, I guess I don't need a job. I can live by faith. That's an imbalance where I thought, oh my God, I had to get a job. I had to work all the time. I had to be so hard. And I didn't know how to believe for the wisdom of God and that everything I set my hands to is blessed. I had none of that revelation. So I was in one side of the ditch, heard live by faith to be prosperous and God to meet your needs, overcorrected and went to the other side of the ditch was, I still got to work. And it was the two coming together is what it was ultimately. And a lot of times that's where I've started realizing, because sometimes we started teaching grace. And of course, grace is a person. Grace is Jesus at the end of the day. But we started teaching grace, and we started talking about all the things we don't have to do. And sometimes it set off this imbalance again, where we were trying to get out of the ditch, because all we knew, especially even the word of faith, all we knew was a bunch of dead works. Man, we didn't really actually trust God for anything. We were trying to make God do anything and everything all the time. When if I did this, if I performed here, if I performed this, if I performed that, God would do this. So everything was about trying to either appease God or get God to move. And that's one ditch. But then we heard grace, and I was like, well, all that goes out the window. And now we're trying to have to come back to the middle of the road and figure out, okay, now in the light of grace, what is our part we play? So the balance is, what's the balance we're trying to? God's part versus our part. And typically, I'm going to give you abilities to recognize it a little bit, but I'm not going to be like, well, this is always 1% what's going to be God's part and what's going to be your part. Here's the catch. It takes wisdom to know the difference. And that flows from your individual relationship with God. Because there's going to be certain times and areas, I think when we hear balance, I don't want people to think we mean, oh, well, it's exactly always 50-50. Well, that's not balance always. That I think we think, well, 50%'s mine, 50%'s this person. Well, anybody in any relationship, especially my married people, life doesn't work like that. Some days it's 100% you, other days it flips and it's 100% them. In one way or another, that's the balance. That's the balance it takes to work for that day in that moment. There's certain areas where, in my marriage, it's 95% me in this one area. And then in some other areas, it completely flips between Nicole and I. And so I want you to not always think, oh, it's just black and white standard. That's an extreme in itself. And so what does that demand? Well, what do I do? It's a relationship between you and God. And as God intuitively leads you and the wisdom of God leads you, you start identifying what is your part and what is God's part. One thing I'd use as a measuring tool for me personally, and you can take from this as you want, I'd ask, what is in my control and what is not my control? If it is in my control to do this, which typically the most main thing that's in my control is me, I'm in control of me is what I have to be, because I'm so busy trying to control everything else. Guess who's not in control of me? No one. So that means I'm out of control, which means my life is spiraling. So we go back, let me back up. So I asked myself, what is in my control? And then what's not in my control? So what's in my control, I say, God, thank you for the courage and the wisdom and the grace to handle it. What is not my control? Well, the Bible's real clear what we do when we hit something that's not in our control. God, you got it. I cast the care of that over to you. That's a balancing tool for me every day. And I can tell when I get into imbalance in those areas. I start experiencing fear. I start experiencing frustration. My emotions are all over the place. When I get into that imbalance, what the first thing that imbalance creates? Internal imbalance on the inside of me. It creates internal conflict. It starts upsetting my soul at the end of the day. And a lot of times I think people don't realize when the internal things don't get right till you start getting some balance. Because the other thing that comes with balance is harmony. When you're in sync with God, when you're in harmony with God, there's balance with that. So I give this analogy. And if some of this you're getting a repeat of Sunday, because I'm really starting to drive this in on Sunday. So I appreciate you guys letting me do this on Thursday. I've come back, but I've gotten it a lot sharper. So I'm reteaching some of it too, because we're not getting it on the first time. I've been realizing to reteach, because like on Thursday nights, man, Thursday night is that normally it's the guys that are just like showing up every time. I'll be honest, you guys are, and you're pulling a lot out of me. But some people show up on Sundays. Some people only show up on Saturdays. So we're just trying to make sure everybody across the board gets it. And then also just, it takes repetitiveness too to get it, to kind of get it in your mind. So I give the analogy though of epoxy. I used to, back when I was in school, elementary school and stuff, I used to be a part of a science group, and they did model rocketry. And when we did the model rocketry, I mean, we'd use little motors, have to light them up, set them up, all that stuff. So they were they were high powered rockets is what they were. So we had to use something because super glue would not work. The heat and stuff would just snap them. They'd be too brittle and mess them up. So you had to use something more stronger, but also would handle the heat. So they talk about epoxy glue, and epoxy glue when I got it is made up of two components is what it is. And so if you use one component and you glue it, nothing happens. If you use the other component by itself, nothing happens. So what it did was when you take both components, equally distribute them and mix them together, all of a sudden it will become active. And you could even smell it. It would have a little smell to it once it became active. And you could feel even just a little bit of heat coming off of it is what you could feel. And then you could actually, that meant it was active, and the ingredients were activated, and you could glue with it at that point, apply it, and it would work great. And the same way, with that imbalance, with that, what I'm talking about, Christians, where one side of the ditch can be all God, or one side of the ditch can be all us. And if you want to ask me, what is most of the church lost in? Not in the all God part, because that tends to get the most criticism, to be honest. But really, truthfully, the most of us is in the all us part and not as much God as we think. And so it's kind of finding that balance, because once you mix them together, is you get results. And that's why a lot of times the church doesn't see results, because we're going to one extreme or the other, and we don't find the in between balance. And like I said, different areas take a different balance and a different mixture of that. But I also don't want you to think it's the God, all God versus the all, hey, we got to do it. It's supposed to mean us coming together. That's the point. These components were meant to mix together to create something that actually works. So it's us working and collaborating and being in sync with God. That's what we're after when I talk about the balance. So what we got to, I'm going to recap this, and then we'll jump into the 4 areas of change. I'm taking 4 areas, kind of like pillars, and saying this is the areas we want to really, if you can find the balance in these general areas, it'll start helping you in your individual areas in life, in your day-to-day life is what it will do. But a lot of people, the reason they don't see change is there's confusion over God's part versus our part. One is the definition of the words, how we define things, and that's why we're always, as preachers, we gotta watch how we're teaching things. A lot of this comes on the pulpit side. A lot of this comes when I'm challenging people now. I've told you guys before, it really got brought up in the Minister Leaders Conference, but you got to think for yourself. You got to think for yourself sometimes. Sometimes you got to just be like, let me think, does that make even sense for a moment? Your God-given intellect, and put it to work instead of just checking out just because someone said it and it sounds good. You're like, I don't know about that. That's what helped me find a lot of balance, for the reason I bring that up, because I started saying, yeah, that preach is good. Yeah, it's catchy. Yeah, it's a good tweet. Yeah, it's a good hashtag, but it sure didn't work in my life. When I applied, it sure made no change in my life. And that was when I started questioning things. But a lot of it's the definition of our words. That's why you hear me constantly come around and try to redefine things. What do you mean when you're saying that? How are you applying that? How are you hearing that? How are you understanding that? When you hear God's part versus your part, do you understand what those terms mean? And so people don't see change when they're confused about the definition of words. That's why we spend all the time saying what grace is, defining the word grace, which is a person, which is Jesus. And we're constantly redefining. Because if you don't understand the definition, man, it's hard to connect with it. The other reason people don't see change in their life, we don't know who plays what part. We don't know whose part it is, and that's really what a lot of this series is about. And that will depend on the area, that will change from time to time. But the one thing is, you want to be in sync with God. For example, like you normally get 2 extremes out of this. I'll tell you which one I am. Most people are either getting out in front of God, or so slow, God's looking at them like, I've done it. When are you going to get off your tail and do it yourself now from here? And a lot of times we don't know how to stay in harmony and sync with God. And me, told you which one I am. I'm the one that gets out front and be like, I got this, God, step aside. I get out in front of God a lot of times, and I've had to learn to counterbalance that by be like, Wes, be a little more patient. Let it play out, let those things, but that's a personal thing for me. But typically, that's one of the things where you want to be in sync with God. Well, how do I be in sync with God? All this comes down to this first part that I keep rehashing, and going over and over and going over. This comes out of your relationship with God. This comes out with being patient to listen for God and to respond to the intuitive parts, where you're like, God's going to tell you different times, okay, you need to do this. And that comes from my time in meditation. That comes from my time meditation or prayer. And prayer means I'm listening a lot more than I'm saying, by the way. And it comes out of that time where intuitively I'm like, I just have that knowing where I'm like, I need to do this. Or sometimes I need to wait. And that's how you're going to find it. But whichever way it is, you're staying in step and in sync with God. And don't worry, this is not about perfection. Let me insert this real quick. Some people are like, I got to make sure if I'm going to succeed, I stay in perfect sync with God. God is not that petty. God is not that weak. Man, if we keep presenting our imperfections as the reason why we're not seeing results in our life, we present a weak God. Do you hear me? You present a very weak God that cannot compensate for our flawed humanity. And the Bible is very opposite of that. Everything about Jesus is a reflection of God filling the gaps of our weakness, our flawed humanity. That's grace. That's the reason I come up with it. I can say things like that with such confidence. All right, then. Let's keep moving. So the other part, finally, why people don't see change is the application of it. Sometimes people just don't know. People don't know how to apply things. And that's why I'm constantly teaching. That's why our ministry is built on, yes, well, what's the vision of church? You know, are you following Dr. Dollar and Pastor Taffy and this and that stuff? I'm like, it's one word. One word, guys. It's not all this other stuff we make this vision about. One word. What's the word? Understanding. Understanding. Everything starts with understanding and builds from there. So that's why I'm always like, let me give you understanding. Let me give you understanding. Because if you don't have understanding, it's not going to be simple. It's not going to be about Jesus. It's not going to be practical things you can take in your everyday life and apply in your everyday life. It's got to be simple. And there's sometimes I come back to my own things, especially about a lot of my teachings about faith, where I was like, that's too complicated. That doesn't quite make enough sense. Let me go back and redo some things, or maybe throw some stuff out and realize, oh, this is what works. And I'm trying to keep, when I talk about the balance, maybe some simplistic things here. So that's my other thing. So the first area we got to, and then I'll go to the second area. The first area of change is a spiritual awakening. Now, the reason I'm saying it this way, we talk about the born again experience, but the born again experience, and people call it different things. They call it getting saved, they call it salvation. I'm not getting so hung up on the term anymore like I used to. You come into awakening that there is a God, and hopefully you awaken to the fact this is a God who is love. And that's a starting place, is what it is. You know, the salvation got so hung up on heaven and hell that it became nothing more than just that. And salvation is so much more than that. How could you say that? Because I just know things different today. I know God is bigger than that. So we put it as the spiritual awakening was an event or a destination or a transaction or a one-time encounter. And that's not how that works. A spiritual awakening or enlightenment, and I'm not talking about the historical time area, because there was an era that was called the Enlightenment era, an enlightenment or an awareness. And what is that awareness? Our entire life, we become more and more aware of God. Now I get this different thing when we're humanity, and some of it's a little flawed doctrinally, but nonetheless, the heart is really what matters, and that's what God sees. Man, I want more of you, God. And when we came into grace, those songs became, man, what do you really want more of you? Oh, I want more of your spirit. You already got it all. That's grace. I don't need more of that. I need more healing. Nope, you got that. You know, more of you in the context, and these are balanced statements, by the way, in the context of the finished works of Jesus, that's a bad prayer. But more of you in the fact of, I want more understanding about who you are. Now, that is a good prayer, about more of you, God. And that's what I'm talking about when I say this awareness. I'm becoming more and more aware of God is love and how that love affects my life. So, moving to the next part, though, talking about spiritual awakening, we talk about activating and enlarging our God-given intuitiveness. Now, this is an important part. Reason I'm starting here. When I'm talking about activating and enlarging, maturing, developing, becoming more sensitive to that intuitive knowing that, oh, I'm following, and we call it being led by the Spirit. You're like, you're using different terms. I am. I'm deliberately using different terms. I was even talking, at the ministry leaders a little bit about this with a couple of people. I said, I'm using those different terms because as soon as I say certain terms, you just tune me out. The religious brain kicks. I heard one minister say we got to sometimes turn our church brains off. I heard that while I was down there. It's just different ways of saying that we're all coming into the saying of this, and what happens is we shut down to being open to gain more light and understanding about a topic. So sometimes I throw in different words that really ultimately land at the mean the same thing, but describe it in a different way. So you may be like, oh, and you don't immediately just hit the snooze button mentally and don't expand your understanding. Remember, we talked about at our church, this is a year of expanding. Boy, that word, oh my gosh, makes much more sense now that we're coming up on this new year, which God has already given me a different word, another word to build. These words are building on. And when never mind, I'm gonna get distracted. Let me stay focused on the subject. I started talking about ministry, and I got like 1,000 things ready just out of me, and I need to stay focused on what tonight's all about, or I'm gonna just confuse you guys and confuse myself running a million miles an hour. So, activating and enlarging our God-given intuitiveness. Why this is important when we talk about balance, man, when I can activate, I'm activating my God-given intuitiveness opposed to my selfishness, opposed to my fear, opposed to my resentments. I'm activating and enlarging. What do I mean by enlarge? I'm developing, I'm maturing. And what is ultimately I'm saying? You're being led by the Spirit ultimately. You're recognizing the voice of God. You're recognizing the promptings of God is what you're doing. So we dealt with that. And so we said the spiritual awakening, this is pretty much God's part. And our part just allowing God to do this. Because why? Ephesians 2:9 says, salvation is not a reward for good things we have done, so none of us can boast about it. Man, that's not what salvation is part. So we come to 2, as I got about good 10 minutes. We're going to rock this 10 minutes and then, boo, see you Saturday night kind of deal. Number 2, though, is a psychological change. Now, the technical term, it is a psychological change. We call it renewing the mind, is what we do a lot of times in church world you hear. But the general term is a lot of times it's actually a psychological change. And that is a very therapeutic term in one regard. But a psychological change encompasses our thinking. We got to change our thinking. Man, I was just listening to the pastor this past Sunday. He was going over it while we were talking about it this past Sunday. Man, you don't see any real change in your life if you cannot change your thinking, because we're recognizing our thinking and our thought patterns. It's also recognizing the patterns is what we're doing, and because those have been built in, those have been created. There's even some neuroscience factors that happen physically in your body at the same time that reinforce these things, by the way. But the beautiful thing, God has, as you see, the way God created the universe is renewal. Everything's renewal. And that's why mind renewal is such an expression of God's beauty, which is negative trash thinking can be renewed to good and positive. That's the most beautiful, beautiful thing about how good and big and God is. So we're recognizing our thought patterns and we're changing them. Is what we're doing. Those negative thought habits, you recognizing those is a big, big deal. So what's the other start? We talk about changing our emotions. And what I mean by changing our emotions, the more important thing, changing is not the main word I use actually there, is recognizing and identifying our emotions. And really what we learn is how to give emotional maturity. And what is emotional maturity really? When your emotions no longer govern you, but you govern your emotions. I give the analogy of a car dash. And you know how those lights come on, like flashing light, check engine light comes on, flashing light, oil needs to be changed. Now we got car text that comes on, it'll put up a little message in the box at times. And you come up and they're warning lights. Now, how foolish it would be, because this is where I used to think in my old limited understanding, especially the word of faith. Man, we're never to be afraid. We're never allowed to have bad emotions. We're never allowed to experience negative emotions, because that's a sign of weak faith. Boy, that was imbalanced teaching by far, is what that was. So what did I learn from that? Imagine me getting mad at the car and beating on the dash and everything else, saying, "You stupid car, how dare you, light come on? You're not supposed to be coming on. You're supposed to be running right, you stupid thing." No, I'm grateful that it comes on, because example, like one of them just a couple weeks ago came on and started flashing and let me know one of my tires were getting a little low on air. Well, I'm glad it flashes and comes on, because it's warning me before it becomes a flat tire. So what I have immediately I'm able to do is add a little tire, because when you drive cars, you got to over time add a little air to them. And eventually they wear out. Sometimes you got to replace them. But thankfully this time it was just, I need to pull over to the gas station, put a little free air in there, and boom, I was gone. Light went off. Car's been running great. But imagine if I just sat there and let that thing go and go and go and go, and then I got a flat tire, and then I'm mad because I got a flat tire. Why? Because I ignored the dash light. And that's why, what am I putting that? I thank God for my negative emotions. I thank God that I feel anger, I feel sadness, I feel all the negative emotions that I feel. I am so glad that God gifted those to me because they're flashing warning lights to say, hey, something's up, something's wrong, address it. Before it becomes a real problem, you end up broken down on the side of life, is what happens. And I've done it. We've all done it, but I have definitely done it. I have been mentally broken down on the side of the road of life because I ignored the dash lights. But now that I've learned how to start maturing and governing them, now when the dash light comes on, I know it's time to do a little bit of maintenance before it becomes a real problem. That's all about psychological change. Right now, I'm just defining it. It's all I'm doing. What does that lead to ultimately, though? This is part where I'm still defining what is a psychological change. It leads to a behavioral change. Change your thinking, learn to govern your emotions, which leads to different habits, leads to different actions, leads to different results in your life. And those can be positive things in your life, is what it can be. That's why we want to do this. And so here we go. I'm gonna just give you the scripture reference. You can go read it for yourself because I'm out of time. But because I need to talk about a couple more things before you guys go. Romans 12, 1 through 3 to NLT. You know what? I'm gonna go ahead and read it. I'm gonna take my time. We can come back next time and finish if we need to. Let me go ahead and read this. So that's where we get Romans 12, verse 1 through 3. NLT, it says in verse 1, and so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. What does it mean by living and holy sacrifice? Well, let's take, for example, the words of my mouth, me using this part of my body. Instead of using it to magnify my flesh, my selfishness, my fear, to amplify hate and all darkness and whatever messed up stuff, I give it over to God, and I set it apart for God to be used for his glory. I give it over to be used for serving others. I give it over to be used for love. That's the example I give, because you take each area of your life, each area of your mind, because really what we're talking about mind renewal. So my thinking is turned over for not the thought patterns of selfishness. My thinking is now supposed to come off the thought patterns of selfishness, because this is the root. If you want to forgive me, I have a little bit of technical glitch. Make sure we're good. Okay. New phone, new setup. I will get some things tweaked next week and we'll run a few tests probably. But anyways, back to this. Good thing. And sometimes Wi-Fi, all kind of stuff, technicologies. But we're here. But what are we ultimately renewing our mind from? Let me repeat it. Make sure we didn't miss it. Renewing our mind from selfishness. Many, if not everything, I would almost dare say, that is negatively, internally going on, that is in your control, by the way. I'm not talking about the out of control stuff. The in control stuff, your thinking and your emotions, the negative part, that indicating light immediately tells me there is an area of selfishness that I have entered into, or I've gotten myself in the center. And when I start building my life and rewiring my thinking, and my emotions are being governed not by selfishness, but by love and by servanthood to how I treat people, all of a sudden that's when I see different behavior. I see different results in my life. So this is what I'm talking about when we read verse 1, giving our lives over to God. Number 2, don't copy the behaviors and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person. How? By changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know or recognize God's will for you, which is good, pleasing, and perfect. Verse 3, because of the privilege and authority God has given me, I give each of you this warning. Don't think you are better than you really are. This is so important, I realize, with verse 1 and 2. I used to always cut it off there and disconnect at verse 3. God has given me, each one of you, this warning. Don't think you are better than you really are. Be honest in your evaluation of yourselves, measuring yourself by what God has given us. Boy, that's where we get this part. So what's our part, God's part? And then I'll give one final thing. I got Gone, kind of 60 seconds here. Throw it at you. Our part is surrender. And of course, surrender is not the best word, maybe, because surrender a lot of times implies against your will. But let's say, for the sake of argument, let's say surrender, but you're giving yourself over to God. That's why it talks about in verse 1. So we get words that describe this a little better as humility, willingness, being open minded. This is our part. Being self aware, willing to be self aware, changing our perspective, recognizing thought patterns, and submitting to God as our higher power and knowing better. That's our part. So everything's about humility, being willing. This is daily. This is a daily decision we have to make. Being open minded and staying open minded, being self aware, learning to change our perspectives, recognize our thought patterns and our emotional patterns and our habits, and then start trusting God to walk out of those and submit to God. Because I've seen people, and this was the one thing I was always wondering, I was like, man, these motivational things are really great. Like, they take really good principles. Therapy is amazing. Like, I would almost, at this day, I would never recommend going out with some form of therapy at some point in your life. All those things are great. But without God's power, remember the epoxy analogy. This is a big one right here. Without God's power infused in all those things, I've seen church world where they say, God's power, I'll just change everything, and I don't need that stupid quacky therapy stuff, this and that. And they end up shipwrecked. I've seen people be like, bump that God stuff, forget that church stuff, forget God in my life. I don't believe there's a God. I'm gonna just go do this institution, that other institution with no higher power. And I've seen them just as shipwrecked. It takes both, is my point. God's part, as we make room for God, God works in us supernaturally to do in us what we couldn't do by ourselves. And what is the number one thing that God renews our mind? Revelation. That is the power of spiritual revelation, where the Spirit of God reveals things to you, where you have that, oh my gosh moment, that goosebump moment, I've heard someone call it before. That moment where it's like, oh, I see it, God moment. That's God's power coming in, rewiring your mind as you've been doing the work, as you've been opening yourself up, and God is just, boom, hits you with that moment, and that's when you see radical change. But where does that change actually happen that shows up outwardly? Right here in the mind. My final thing I'll leave you with, it always takes other people being involved in this process. This is the catch. You know, the Bible's real clear. I mean, even Ephesians was, each joint supplying each other and things like that. You never get there by yourself. Excuse me. The analogy I give here, when my physical body, take your physical body, when you're treating it, when you need surgery, when you need any kind of medical treatment, where do you go? You go to a doctor or someone else for help. You never end up doing it by yourself. You're like, well, no, I stay at home and use those remedies. Where'd you get those remedies from? If they do work, by the way. Careful with some of that. But if they do work, you got that from grandmama who got it from someone else. Or you pulled that off, you know, oh, I just went to the store and got me a little over-the-counter thing and did it myself and stayed at home. Where do you think the over-counter thing came from? From someone else passing on information to information to information. So we don't treat our physical bodies to experience health and success by ourselves. We go to the doctor. We use other people that can be like, oh, let me examine you. Let me point things out to you. And the same way, we have to do that with our psychological change. I do that. I have a team around me of people. I saw many of that team when I went to Atlanta. You know, I saw my own spiritual parents. That's part of my team. I saw my natural parents down. They're part of my team. You know, my wife, of course, that's number one person, a part of my team. You know, even my son, he plays, and this is where I got realizing he's a part of my team. This is what came out Sunday. I was like, all these people around, the biggest thing they do, they act like mirrors around me to my soul. Because that's the point. How would you fix your hair? You trying to fix your hair, me, my beard, or all that stuff. Or ladies, you trying to put on your makeup or something like that, and you got no mirrors around you, and all of a sudden you trying to put some eyeliner, you're going to be all the way here. Your lipstick's going to be all outside the lines and things. Why? You need a mirror to see what you're doing. And for your mind and for your soul, Now, don't take this as I was joking about this song. Like, please don't make this some crazy catchphrase or something like that. Keep it in balance. But your mind, the people around you are like mirrors to your soul, and they reflect back to you the good parts and the bad parts, and allow you to adjust. And so these are the different parts where people like, man, I want to see change in my life. I just went through God's part, the balance of God's part, the balance of our part, and the balance of the community around you that you need in your life. When these are working in harmony with each other, you're going to see real change in your life. All right, guys, I went 40 minutes. I'm not going any longer. I'm committed to keep it right at that mark every time. We finished 2. So number 3, and some of this I'll be redoing on Sunday and things like that. We'll talk about daily provisions for survival. Man, we got to take care of this physical body. We got to eat every day. We got to have a roof over our day. And a lot of people don't understand how to get their needs met because they have imbalance in their life and they don't understand their part and God's part in the situation. And we've kind of misemphasized certain areas. And it takes these things, we want them coming in harmony so they can work together. Why? Man, people need to have their needs met. That is a part of your life. So we'll get into all that. But thank you guys for coming on. Apologize from the video and stuff, but I think you guys got me clearly. You saw me clearly. I'll have some things tweaked next time I come back around. All I got to do is a couple little settings. I know what I need to adjust in my new phone here, and we'll be good to go. But other than that, I will see you guys Saturday, 6 p.m., and then virtually, that is, and then in person at the Alhambra Ballroom this Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Man, you don't want to miss this message. So hope to see you there. Love you all, and have a great, great night.